Margaret tightened her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase as she stepped off the bus. The air smelled different here, crisp, with a faint hint of pine that reminded her of home. She glanced around at the unfamiliar streets, bustling, with people going about their day. It had been years since she last visited this town, and everything seemed both familiar and strange all at once. Her heart thudded in her chest, not just from the excitement of seeing her son again, but also from the weight of unanswered questions gnawing at her mind. She pulled out an old photograph tucked inside her coat pocket. In it, James stood tall and proud, his smile radiant beneath the brim of his military cap. His uniform was neatly pressed, medals gleaming against the sunlight. Margaret traced the edges of the photo with her thumb, feeling the creases where it had been folded and unfolded countless times over the years. That picture represented so much more than just a moment frozen in time. It was her connection to him, her anchor when life became too overwhelming. James had always been her rock, even as a child. He was the kind of boy who would climb trees, to rescue stray kittens or spend hours helping neighbors fix their fences without expecting anything in return. When he announced his decision to join the military, Margaret felt a mix of pride and dread. Pride because she knew how deeply he cared about protecting others, and dread because she couldn't shake the fear of what might happen to him far away from home. Still, she supported him wholeheartedly, waving goodbye as he boarded the train that took him to basic training. For a while, letters kept them connected. At first they came regularly, filled with stories of his adventures and assurances that he was safe. But as months turned into years, the frequency of those letters dwindled. What started as weekly updates became monthly notes, then sporadic, messages scrawled hastily on postcards. Eventually, the flow of communication stopped altogether. Margaret tried calling, writing back, even reaching out to the recruitment office, but every attempt ended in silence. Each unanswered query left her heart heavier, yet hope refused to die within her. Now standing on the sidewalk clutching her suitcase, Margaret reminded herself why she had come. This trip wasn't just about reconnecting with James, it was about closure. She needed to see him, hear his voice, feel his presence again. If nothing else, she wanted to understand why he had gone silent. Was he angry? Busy? Or something worse? Shaking off the dark thoughts clouding her mind, she squared her shoulders and began walking toward the address she had memorized long ago. The journey hadn't been easy. Margaret lived in a small rural town miles away, and traveling by bus meant enduring cramped seats, noisy passengers, and endless stretches of highway. Yet none of that mattered now. Every bump in the road, every delay caused by traffic, only fueled her determination to reach her destination. Along the way, she replayed memories of James in her mind, the sound of his laughter echoing through their tiny kitchen, the way he used to tease her about her cooking, the quiet moments they shared sitting side by side on the porch watching the sunset. Those memories were bittersweet, tinged with longing but also warmth. As she walked, Margaret noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Houses looked newer, gardens more manicured, cars shinier. Time had moved forward, leaving its mark everywhere, except in her heart, which remained stubbornly rooted in the past. Finally, she arrived at the street she had been searching for. Number 147, a modest two-story house painted soft blue with white shutters, stood before her. It looked exactly as she remembered, though perhaps a little brighter, a little tidier. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine James stepping out onto the porch, arms wide open, welcoming her with that same warm grin from the photograph. But reality quickly intruded. No one came outside. Instead, a young woman appeared, at the window, peering curiously at the stranger standing on the sidewalk. Margaret hesitated, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. An elderly woman in a faded coat, dragging a battered suitcase behind her. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to move forward. One step, then another, until she reached the front door. With trembling fingers, she rang the bell, clutching the photograph tightly as if it could shield her from whatever awaited her inside. Seconds ticked by like hours. Footsteps sounded from within, growing louder until the door swung open. A friendly face greeted her, a young woman with curly hair and a bright smile. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked warmly. Margaret blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't James. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering the door? Before panic could take hold, she managed to stammer, "I'm looking for my son. James. Does he live here?" The young woman's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. "Oh," she said softly, stepping aside. "Please come in." And with that, Margaret crossed the threshold, unaware that the answer she sought would unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. The young woman ushered Margaret into the cozy living room, her movements polite but tinged with a nervous energy that Margaret couldn't quite place. The interior of the house felt different, cleaner, brighter, and decorated in a style that didn't match James's taste. Where there had once been faded furniture and mismatched throw pillows, now stood sleek modern pieces arranged with careful precision. A large painting of a serene mountain landscape hung above the fireplace, its vibrant colors contrasting sharply with the muted tones Margaret remembered from her son's days here. "Please, have a seat," the woman said, gesturing toward a plush armchair. Margaret hesitated for a moment before lowering herself onto it, clutching her purse tightly in her lap. She glanced around, searching for any sign of James, a photo, a familiar book, anything, but found nothing. Her heart sank, a little more with each passing second. "I'm Sarah," the woman added, perching on the edge of the couch across from her. "And my husband Michael should be home soon. He'll want to meet you." Margaret nodded absently, her mind racing. "Where's James?" she asked again, her voice firmer this time. "Does he still live here? I haven't seen him in so long." Her words trailed off as Sarah exchanged a glance with another figure who had just entered the room, a tall man with tousled hair and an apologetic smile. This must be Michael, Margaret thought, though his presence did little to ease her growing unease. "Well," Sarah began cautiously, choosing her words carefully, "James isn't here right now. He rented this house to us while he was deployed overseas." Her tone was light, almost cheerful, but there was something guarded about the way she spoke, as if she were holding back information. Margaret frowned, leaning forward slightly, in her chair. "Deployed?" she echoed, her brow furrowing. "He didn't tell me he'd moved out or rented the house. When was the last time you saw him?" Michael stepped closer, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. "It's been a while," he admitted, avoiding direct eye contact. "We've only met him a couple of times when we first signed the lease agreement. After that, he went back to duty, and we haven't heard much from him since." Margaret's stomach churned. Something wasn't adding up. If James had truly rented out his home, why hadn't he mentioned it in his letters? Or, at least sent her an address where she could reach him? And why did these strangers seem so reluctant to talk about him? She studied their faces intently, trying to gauge whether they were hiding something or simply unsure how to handle the situation. To distract herself, Margaret accepted Sarah's offer of tea and allowed the couple to show her around the house. They led her through the rooms, pointing out features they had updated or rearranged. "We tried to keep some of James's things intact," Sarah explained as they entered what used to be his bedroom. Now converted into a guest room, it bore no resemblance to the space Margaret remembered. Gone were the posters of sports teams and rock bands, replaced by minimalist decor and neutral-colored bedding. Despite the changes, Margaret spotted something tucked away on a high shelf, a dusty box labeled "James's Stuff" in faded marker. Her breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, she reached for it, ignoring Sarah's soft protest. Inside, she found a jumble of items: old textbooks, a baseball glove, a few stray photographs. One picture in particular caught her attention. It showed James standing beside a group of fellow soldiers, all grinning broadly despite the desert backdrop behind them. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the outline of his face with her finger. "He always talked about you," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence. Margaret looked up, startled. Whenever he came by to check on the house, He'd mentioned how proud he was of having such a strong mother. You meant a lot to him. Though the words were meant to comfort, they only deepened Margaret's sense of loss. Why hadn't he come to see her himself? Why had he let so much time pass without reaching out? As gratitude warred with frustration, inside her Margaret forced a weak smile. "Thank you for taking care of his home," she murmured. "But I need to know more. Do you have any idea where he might be now? Has anyone contacted him recently?" Sarah and Michael exchanged another uneasy glance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah cleared her throat and said, "We don't want to alarm you, but, well, we haven't heard from him in months. Not since before he left for his last mission." Margaret froze, her grip tightening on the photograph. Months? That timeline didn't align with the sporadic updates she had received, or rather, failed to receive from James. Panic bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. She opened her mouth to demand answers, but Michael cut her off. Gently, "We understand this is difficult," he said, his voice low and steady. "If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. We genuinely liked James, and we're worried too." His sincerity softened Margaret's sharp edges, but it did little to quell the storm brewing inside her. She thanked them numbly, excusing herself to sit alone for a while. Back in the living room, she stared blankly at the wall, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with her son. Had she missed signs of trouble? Should she have pushed harder to stay in touch? As twilight settled over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the floor, Margaret realized she needed answers, and she wouldn't leave until she got them. Whatever secrets this house held, whatever truths Sarah and Michael were hesitant to share, she was determined to uncover. For James, for herself, for closure. The evening dragged on, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on Margaret like a heavy blanket. She sat in the living room, her hands clasped tightly around the teacup Sarah had given her earlier, though its warmth had long since faded. The silence between them was uncomfortable, broken only by the occasional rustle of fabric or the distant hum of traffic outside. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah and Michael were holding back something important, something they didn't want to say. Finally, she broke the quiet. "You said you haven't heard from James in months," she began, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Did he mention anything before he left? Any idea where he was going? What mission he was part of?" Her eyes darted between the couple, searching for any flicker of recognition or hesitation. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Michael as if seeking guidance. He nodded slightly, encouraging her to speak. "He didn't share many details," Sarah admitted. "But he did talk about how much he missed being home. He mentioned you a lot, Mrs. Thompson. He always spoke so fondly of you." Margaret's heart clenched. Those words should have brought comfort, but instead, they deepened her ache. If James had been thinking of her so often, why hadn't he tried harder to reach out? Why had his letters stopped altogether? Something wasn't right, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "There is one thing," he said slowly, his tone cautious. "Before he left, James gave us an envelope. He said, well, he said it was for you, in case anything happened to him." The room seemed to freeze. Margaret's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she thought her heart might stop. "What do you mean, in case anything happened?" she asked sharply, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. Michael looked pained, as if regretting having brought it up. "I don't know exactly what he meant," he replied honestly. "But he made it clear that it was important. He trusted us to keep it safe until you came looking for him." Without waiting for further explanation, Margaret held out her hand. "Give it to me," she demanded, her voice firm but laced with desperation. Sarah disappeared into another room and returned moments later with a sealed envelope. It was plain, unremarkable except for the familiar handwriting scrawled across the front. "To Mom." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she took the envelope, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the paper. For a moment she simply stared, at it, unable to bring herself to open it. This small piece of paper felt like a bridge between her and James, but also like a barrier, shielding her from whatever painful truth lay inside. "Would you like some privacy?" Sarah asked gently, breaking the tense silence. Margaret shook her head, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe she needed witnesses to hear whatever James had written, or maybe she just didn't trust herself to face it alone. With shaking hands, she carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter within. The handwriting was unmistakably James's, bold yet neat, the same style he'd used in school assignments and birthday cards over the years. Margaret began reading aloud, her voice soft and halting. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm not coming back. I wanted to tell you myself, but I didn't know how. You've always been my rock, my guiding light, and the thought of causing you pain breaks my heart. But I need you to know that everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made, has been for you, for us. For the future we dreamed about when I was a kid. I joined the military because I believed in protecting people, in making the world safer for families like ours. And even though it's taken me far away from home, please know that you've never been far from my thoughts. Every time I look at the stars at night, I think of sitting on the porch with you, watching the sky change colors. Those memories are what keep me going when things get tough. If I don't make it back, I want you to promise me something. Don't let grief consume you. Live your life fully, laugh often, and cherish the people who love you. You deserve happiness, Mom, more than anyone I know. And no matter where I am, I'll always be with you. In spirit, if not in person. Thank you for being the best mom anyone could ask for. I love you more than words can say. Love always." James. Margaret's vision blurred as tears spilled onto the page, smudging the ink. She clutched the letter to her chest, her body racked with sobs. The room spun around her, the voices of Sarah and Michael fading into a distant murmur. All she could focus on was the finality of those words, the heartbreaking certainty that James knew he might not return. Sarah knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're so sorry," she whispered, her own eyes glistening with tears. "We didn't know what to do. We thought maybe someone else would have told you." Margaret shook her head, struggling to compose herself. "No one told me," she choked out. "I didn't know. I kept waiting for him, to come home, to write, to call, but nothing." Anger bubbled beneath the surface, mingling with her grief. How could the world move on without telling her that her son was gone? How could they leave her in the dark? Michael cleared his throat, his expression somber. "Mrs. Thompson, we can try to find out more. There must be records, contacts, someone who can give you answers. We'll help however we can." Though their offer was sincere, Margaret felt numb. Answers wouldn't bring James back. Nothing could undo the emptiness that now filled the space where her son once stood. Still, she nodded weakly, knowing she needed to uncover the full story, not just for closure, but for James. He deserved to be remembered, honored, understood as ye. The night wore on. Margaret found herself pouring out stories of James to Sarah and Michael, stories of his childhood, his dreams, his quirks. They listened intently, asking questions and sharing their own brief memories of him. Slowly, the sharp edges of her pain began to soften, replaced by a bittersweet warmth. These strangers who barely knew her son cared enough to sit with her through her sorrow. That in itself was a gift. By the time dawn broke, casting golden light through the windows, Margaret had made a decision. She wouldn't leave this town, not yet. Not until she had pieced together the fragments of James's life and ensured that his memory lived on. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the same strength and resilience that James had admired in her all these years. The morning light filtered through the curtains, painting soft patterns on the floor of Sarah and Michael's living room. Margaret sat quietly in the same armchair she had occupied the night before, her eyes fixed on the envelope containing James's letter. It rested on the coffee table in front of her, its presence both a comfort and a weight. She had spent hours replaying his words in her mind, trying to reconcile the vibrant sun she remembered with the haunting finality of his message. Sarah entered the room carrying a tray of coffee and toast, setting it down gently on the table. "I thought you might need something to eat," she said softly, giving Margaret a tentative smile. Margaret nodded in gratitude but didn't reach for the food. Her appetite had vanished, replaced by an unshakable determination to uncover the truth about James's fate. "I'm going to find out what happened to him," Margaret said suddenly, her voice firm despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "I can't just sit here wondering anymore." Sarah exchanged a glance with Michael, who had joined them moments earlier. "We'll help," he assured her. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. Their kindness was unexpected but deeply appreciated. She knew she couldn't navigate this labyrinth of unanswered questions without support. Together, they decided their first step would be visiting the local Veterans Affairs office. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. A thread to pull in hopes of unraveling the mystery surrounding James's disappearance. The drive to the VA office felt endless. Margaret stared out the car window as Sarah navigated the streets, her thoughts swirling like storm clouds. The town looked different now, less welcoming, more ominous. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't ready to hear. When they finally arrived at the modest brick building. Margaret took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, clutching her purse tightly. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, filled with the low murmur of conversations and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. Her receptionist greeted them warmly, directing them to an officer named Lieutenant Harris. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes that hinted at years of bearing bad news. As Margaret introduced herself and explained why she was there, his expression grew somber. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, folding his hands on the desk in front of him, "I'm afraid I have some difficult information to share." His words hit Margaret like a punch to the chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Your son, Private James Thompson, was killed in action 6 months ago during a surprise attack on his unit." The room spun. Margaret gripped the edge of the chair to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. Killed in action. The phrase echoed in her mind, hollow and merciless. 6 months. All this time she had been waiting, hoping, praying, and no one had told her. No official notification, no visit from a uniformed officer, nothing. Just silence. "How could this happen?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why wasn't I informed?" Lieutenant Harris sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "We made several attempts to contact you, ma'am. Unfortunately, our records listed an outdated address. By the time we realized the error, it was too late." Too late. Those 2 words, cut deeper than any knife. Margaret felt tears welling up again, but she blinked them away, refusing to let grief overwhelm her. Not yet. Instead, she focused on gathering details. "Can you tell me more about what happened?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Where was he stationed? What kind of mission was he on?" Harris hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing sensitive military operations. But seeing the resolve in Margaret's eyes, he relented. Private Thompson was part of a reconnaissance unit deployed to a conflict zone overseas. Their mission involved gathering intelligence to prevent civilian casualties. During one operation, their convoy was ambushed. Despite their best efforts, they were outnumbered. Margaret listened intently, absorbing every word. Though the story was painful, it gave her clarity, a way to piece together the fragments of James's life. She learned that he had been posthumously awarded a medal for bravery, having risked his life to protect his fellow soldiers. That small detail brought her a measure of pride, even amidst the heartbreak. After leaving the VA office, Margaret insisted on visiting the local Veterans Memorial Park. Sarah and Michael accompanied her, offering quiet support as she walked among the rows of engraved names. There, etched in stone beneath a proud eagle insignia, was James's name. Seeing it written so formally, so permanently, made his loss feel real in a way the letter in the officer's words never could. Margaret traced the letters with her fingertips, murmuring his name under her breath. "You were always my hero," she whispered, her voice cracking, "even when I didn't know it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Margaret found herself reflecting on the day's revelations. The pain was still raw, but it was tempered by a growing sense of purpose. James had given his life to protect others, and now it was her responsibility to honor his sacrifice. She resolved to stay in town for a while longer, immersing herself in the community he had once served. Maybe volunteering at the VA office or mentoring families of other fallen soldiers would help her keep his memory alive. That evening, back at Sarah and Michael's house, Margaret shared her plans with them. They listened attentively, nodding, in agreement. "If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know," Sarah said earnestly. "James meant a lot to us too, even if we only knew him briefly." Margaret smiled faintly, touched by their sincerity. For the first time since arriving in this unfamiliar town, she felt a glimmer of hope. Grief wouldn't vanish overnight, nor should it, but perhaps with time and effort, she could transform her sorrow into something meaningful, something James would be proud of. Before heading to bed, Margaret placed the envelope with James's letter in a drawer beside her makeshift bed. It was a reminder of her son's love, his courage, and the legacy he left behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new steps toward healing. But for now, she allowed herself to rest, cradling the memories of James close to her heart. The days that followed were a blur of emotions for Margaret. Moments of overwhelming grief mingled with fleeting glimpses of peace. She had decided to stay in the town longer than planned, drawn by an unspoken need to be closer to James, even if only in spirit. Sarah and Michael graciously offered her their guest room, insisting she take all the time she needed. Their kindness was a lifeline during those turbulent weeks, and Margaret found herself growing fonder of them with each passing day. Her mornings began at the Veterans Memorial Park. It became her sanctuary, a place where she could sit quietly and reflect on James's life. The engraved names on the stone wall seemed to whisper stories of bravery, sacrifice, and love. Margaret often brought flowers or small tokens to leave beside James's name, as if offering him pieces of herself. Sometimes, strangers would approach her, sharing their own memories of loved ones lost to war. These interactions reminded her that she wasn't alone in her pain. Countless others carried similar burdens bound together by shared sorrow. During one such visit, Margaret met an elderly man named Walter, who came to the park every afternoon to tend to the garden surrounding the memorial. His weathered hands worked tirelessly, planting vibrant blooms that added color and life to the somber space. When he noticed Margaret sitting alone, he walked over and introduced himself. "I see you here often," he said gently. "Who are you visiting?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "My son James," she replied, pointing to his name on the wall. Walter's expression softened and he nodded knowingly. "He must have been a good man," he said. "They always are." Over time, Margaret and Walter formed an unlikely friendship. He told her about his late wife, who had passed away years ago, and how volunteering at the park helped him cope with his loss. Inspired by his example, Margaret decided to get involved as well. She began assisting Walter with gardening tasks, finding solace in the rhythm of digging soil and planting seeds. Each flower they nurtured felt like a tribute not just to James, but to all those whose lives had been cut short too soon. In addition to her work at the park, Margaret started volunteering at the local Veterans Affairs office. At first, she helped with simple administrative tasks, filing paperwork, organizing records, and answering phones. But as she grew more comfortable, she took on roles that allowed her to connect directly with families affected by military service. She listened to their stories, offered words of encouragement, and sometimes simply sat with them in silence when words failed. Many people remarked on how much comfort her presence brought, unaware that she was healing alongside them. One particularly poignant moment came when a young mother named Lisa visited the office seeking information about her husband, who had gone missing in action. Margaret recognized the same desperation in Lisa's eyes that she herself had felt just weeks earlier. Without hesitation, She reached out, holding the woman's hand and assuring her that she wasn't alone. They spent hours talking, sharing, tears and laughter, and by the end of the day, Lisa left feeling slightly lighter thanks to Margaret's compassion. Through these acts of service, Margaret discovered a new sense of purpose. While the ache of losing James never fully disappeared, it transformed into something bittersweet yet meaningful. She realized that honoring his memory didn't mean clinging to the past. It meant using her pain to uplift others, just as James had done through his service. As her time in the town drew to a close, Margaret prepared to return home. Before leaving, she organized a small gathering at the memorial park to thank everyone who had supported her. Sarah, Michael, Walter, Lisa, and several others attended, bringing food, music, and heartfelt speeches. Underneath the golden glow of sunset, they celebrated James's life and legacy, sharing stories that painted a vivid picture of the kind, courageous man he had been. Sarah handed Margaret a box filled with items from James's belongings that she had kept safe. Inside were old photographs, letters, and mementos, treasures that now carried even greater significance. Margaret hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. "You've given me so much," she whispered. "Thank you for taking care of him, and for taking care of me." On the morning of her departure, Margaret stood once again at the bus stop, clutching the box and the envelope containing James's letter. This time, however, her heart felt different. Not lighter exactly, but fuller. She had faced the hardest truth a parent could endure, yet she had emerged stronger, more resilient. The journey had changed her in ways she couldn't have imagined, teaching her the power of community, compassion, and remembrance. As the bus pulled away, Margaret gazed out the window, watching the town fade into the distance. Her fingers rested on the photograph of James tucked inside her coat pocket, the same one she had carried throughout her trip. Though miles separated her from the place where she had confronted her greatest fear, she knew James's spirit would always remain with her. And as long as she continued honoring his memory by helping others, he would live on, not just in her heart, but in the hearts of everyone whose lives he touched. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Margaret faced it with renewed determination. She had learned that grief, no matter how profound, could coexist with hope. James had taught her that lesson in life, and now, even in death, he continued to guide her forward.